They said the sky broke the night I was born. Thunder didn't just sound, it screamed, echoing through the mountains like an ancient god's warning. My mother's cries rose with the storm, and the midwife swore she felt the ground tremble beneath her feet. When I finally drew my first breath, lightning struck the old fig tree outside our hut, splitting it in half as if heaven itself wanted to deny my arrival. The midwife's hands trembled as she lifted me from the blood-soaked sheets. She looked into my face once, only once, before crossing herself and stepping back, whispering that no light should meet my eyes. My mother reached for me, her fingers shaking, her lips pale. "Forgive him," she whispered. Those were her last words, soft, breaking, unfinished. The moment her voice faded, the storm outside died as if it had taken her life in exchange for mine. My father stood frozen, a man carved out of grief and disbelief. He wouldn't come near the bed, wouldn't look at me, wouldn't touch the bundle that still carried my mother's warmth. The priest who had been called to bless my birth dropped his rosary and fled without a word. The neighbors gathered outside our door, whispering that a red moon hung over the roof and that no child born beneath such a sky would ever know peace. For 7 days, my father did not speak. When he finally looked at me, it was not love that filled his eyes, but the weight of something darker, a mixture of guilt, fear, and the suspicion that I had come from some place forbidden. He fed me because I was his blood, but every movement was careful, distant, as if I might burn him by touch. In the mornings, crows perched along the thatch above our house, dozens of them, watching silently until my father left for the fields. When I was old enough to ask why they came, he told me they were sent to guard cursed souls so they would not wander free. From that day, the village children began to avoid me. Their parents would pull them close whenever I passed, crossing their fingers behind their backs to ward off my shadow. I learned to move quietly, to hide my laughter, to keep my hands in my pockets so no one would see the faint silver glow that sometimes pulsed beneath my skin in the dark. The first time I understood what they feared was on a market morning when an old woman collapsed beside me. I tried to help her up, but she screamed, "Don't touch me," and called me omen child. That night, my father beat the doorframe with his fists, cursing the heavens for leaving him with what the gods had refused. Years passed, and I began to believe the whispers myself, that I was the reason the wells dried early, that my breath spoiled the wind, that every dying harvest was a reminder that I should not have lived. I stopped speaking to the stars and started talking to the silence. Yet somewhere deep inside me, a strange hunger grew, a sense that something within me was waiting to be seen. It happened on a day, thick with rain. I fell near the edge of the stream and scraped my knee. Blood darkened the mud, and as I cried, my tears fell onto the ground. For a moment, so brief I thought I imagined it, the soil beneath me shimmered like sunlight under water. The air rippled, soft and trembling, and the sound of my own heartbeat filled my ears. I pressed my palms into the earth again, and this time it glowed brighter, breathing with me. I ran home, wild with wonder, shouting for my father. He came running, but when I showed him the light still fading on my hands, he recoiled as though I had touched death itself. "Don't ever speak of this," he said, voice shaking. "Don't let anyone see." I tried to tell him it was beautiful, that maybe it was a gift, but he slapped me before I could finish. His eyes glistened with tears he refused to shed. "Your mother tried to warn me," he said, "but I didn't listen." That night he didn't pray. He sat by the fire, whispering to something I could not hear. When I woke, the air was thick with the scent of smoke, heavy and sharp. The door was locked from the outside. I pounded the wood until my fists bled, but the flames had already reached the ceiling. Through the cracks, I saw his shadow standing still, silent, watching. The roof began to roar. Heat swallowed the air. I screamed for him, for anyone, but only the fire answered. And in that instant, I understood he hadn't locked the door to keep the danger out. He'd locked it to keep the curse inside. The night did not burn. It remembered. Every spark that leapt from our roof carried my name, whispering it through the smoke as if the fire itself had been waiting for me. I could hear the villagers outside calling for help and for my death in the same breath. That was the moment I learned that love and fear speak the same language when the world believes you are cursed. The house moaned like something alive as the flames climbed higher, painting the walls in shades of gold and grief. My father's voice rose through the smoke, steady at first, then breaking into a plea. I followed the sound, stumbling through heat so fierce it bent the air, until I found him on his knees beside my mother's empty bed. The old Bible lay open before him, its edges curling in the firelight, and his fingers traced the words as if he could still bargain with heaven. I begged him to run. He looked up, and the look in his eyes was neither anger nor despair. It was acceptance. "The curse ends tonight," he said softly, the words trembling between us like the last bridge of love we still shared. Then, before I could reach him, he pushed me backward through the doorway. The world behind me exploded in a roar, and the roof collapsed where he had been kneeling. Outside, the villagers stood frozen at the edge of the clearing, their torches dim beside the inferno. No one came forward. They watched me, the way one watches a storm, waiting for it to choose its next direction. Someone shouted that the boy had called the lightning, and another swore they saw shadows moving inside the fire. The fear spread faster than the flames ever could. I sank to my knees, the ground trembling beneath me, and cried out until my throat was raw. Each tear that fell hissed against the burning earth, and then came a sound, low, deep, impossible. The crack of thunder directly above my head. Lightning struck the hill, splitting the air with a blinding white light. The people screamed, scattering into the dark, and the echo of their terror filled the valley. When the light faded, I felt hands seize me, rough, trembling hands fueled by desperation. They dragged me toward the great tree near the riverbank, shouting that the demon must be bound before dawn. I didn't resist. Part of me believed they were right. They tied my wrists with rope that smelled of smoke and fear, chanting prayers they barely remembered. Every voice rose against me, and for the first time, I stopped fighting the name they had given me. Cursed. I bowed my head, waiting for whatever judgment they believed would save them. The fire raged on behind us, its reflection turning the river red. I thought of my father's last look, of my mother's final word. Forgive. The weight of both pressed against my chest until I could hardly breathe. I whispered their names once, and the wind answered. A silence followed, strange and heavy. Then a single drop of moisture touched my cheek. Another followed, and another, slow, deliberate, impossible. The villagers looked up, but the sky was clear. The clouds had burned away hours ago. Still the rain kept falling, soft and shining, hissing when it met the flames. The fire died as if soothed by an unseen hand, and the smoke dissolved into the stars. The crowd stepped back, murmuring that the heavens had changed their mind. I felt the ropes loosen around my wrists, slick with water that shimmered faintly in the firelight. When I looked down, I saw the droplets weren't falling from above at all. They were sliding from my own skin, glowing where they touched the ground. My tears had become rain, and the night had begun to listen to me. They said the river was older than mercy, and that its waters remembered every sin ever washed in them. When they drove me toward its banks at dawn, the mist was so thick it felt like walking through breath that belonged to someone else. No one met my eyes. They only pointed to the east, where the light broke like a wound. I understood then that exile is not distance. It is the silence that follows your name when no one dares to speak it. The ropes cut from my wrists fell to the mud with a sound small enough to be mistaken for forgiveness. The priest whispered a blessing he did not mean, and the villagers stepped back as if my shadow might stain them. They tossed a crust of bread toward me, food for survival or humiliation. I could no longer tell the difference. I crossed the river barefoot, each step sinking into silt that clung like memory. The current was slow but heavy, and when I reached the far side, the world behind me already felt like a story someone else had lived. The forest waiting there was not a place of life, but of listening. The air hung still. Even the birds refused to sing. I walked until the water could no longer be heard, and built a shelter from branches that had fallen long before I arrived, weaving fear between them as mortar. Nights were long, filled with the quiet ache of a sky that offered no stars. I drank rain from my palms and chewed roots that tasted of iron. Hunger became a prayer I stopped expecting to be answered. But the mind is a cruel companion in solitude. It invents company when the heart cannot bear its own echo. Some nights I thought I heard footsteps pacing beside my shelter, soft as breathing. Other times the wind seemed to form my name and dissolve before I could answer. I told myself madness had finally found me, that the curse had followed me across the river and taken a new shape. Then, one gray morning, I saw her. She stood on the opposite bank where the mist touched the water, thin as a reed, her hands pressed to her chest. Her hair clung to her face, her lips were cracked and pale. She coughed, and the sound carried across the distance like the cry of a lost bird. Our eyes met, and something in her gaze stilled the air between us. "You're not what they say," she called, her voice trembling but clear. I wanted to believe her, yet belief was a wound I had learned never to reopen. So I turned away, pretending not to hear. Still she came each day, sometimes to speak, sometimes only to stand there, as if her silence itself were a kind of bridge. The forest, once hostile, seemed to lean closer whenever she appeared. Her presence softened the edges of the world until I could almost imagine it forgiving us both. On the 10th night, the mist was thicker than ever, glowing faintly with the light of a moon I could not see. Through it I heard her coughing again, harsher now, punctuated by the rasp of someone running out of breath. I stepped from my shelter, heart pounding, and saw her kneel at the river's edge, her body folding as though the weight of the air had become too much to bear. I forgot my exile, and ran. Branches tore at my arms as I reached the bank. The moment my feet touched the water, the current stilled, the surface brightened from within, and a line of light unfurled between us like a living bridge. The river, once silent, began to shimmer and breathe, calling my name as if it had been waiting for this very moment to remember me. Before Amara, the world met me with silence or screams. Then, one morning, I saw her step through the mist, as if the forest itself had dreamed her into being. The light touched her face and did not recoil. The wind shifted to greet her by name. For the first time since my birth, something living moved toward me without dread, and that small act, the courage of one frail girl, broke every law the villagers had written about monsters. Amara. The name carried a calm I had never known. She was the healer's daughter, once the pride of our village, until sickness took root in her lungs and fear took root in her father's heart. They said he banished her to save the rest, though everyone knew the truth. He was trying to save his faith, not his child. She wandered to the river because there was nowhere else left to go. I had been there first, the shadow they warned children about. And yet, when she saw me, she did not turn away. At first she came only to sit beside the water. The current whispered between us, carrying questions neither of us dared to speak. I watched her fingers trace patterns on the surface, small circles that caught the light like halos. Sometimes she would cough until her whole body shook, and I would grip the roots of the trees to stop myself from crossing. The old terror lived in me, still. The fear that even kindness could end in fire. Days folded into one another. We learned to speak in fragments, letting the river fill the spaces between our words. She told me about herbs that could draw poison from the blood, about how her father once said every wound carries its own cure, if only the healer has patience to find it. I told her nothing about the fire, nothing about the curse that followed my name. Yet she seemed to know. "You're tired of being the reason people pray," she said once, her voice faint as mist. "Let someone pray for you instead." When I warned her that my tears brought sickness, she smiled, a fragile, stubborn thing that turned fear into light. "Then let them fall for me," she said, and I felt the world tilt, small words spoken with a faith strong enough to challenge the heavens. Evening descended in copper light, the air thick with rain that never came. I watched her stand, sway, then sink to her knees, her breath thin and ragged. Every memory of loss, every warning I had ever believed, vanished in that instant. I ran through the shallows, the river clutching at my legs, and caught her before she fell completely. Her skin burned beneath my hands. The sound of her coughing broke into silence. My tears fell without permission. They struck her face and spread like quicksilver, sinking into her skin until the fever marks faded as if erased by light. For a heartbeat, the whole forest held its breath. Then her eyes opened, clear, steady, alive, and the reflection I saw there wasn't of a monster, but of a man still capable of saving something. "You're not cursed," she whispered, voice trembling between belief and discovery. "You're chosen." I wanted to deny it, but denial required strength I no longer had. The river sighed around us, its current slow and warm, and somewhere beyond the trees a single bird began to sing, the first sound of peace I had heard since my birth. When dawn came, the song was replaced by footsteps. The villagers stood on the far bank, their faces pale, their eyes wide at the sight of Amara standing, healed. Whispers rippled through them, fear first, then awe, then something greedier. They didn't look at her, they looked at me. The question in their silence was louder than any prayer. What else can the cursed one do? In a village built on fear, miracles are never blessings. They are threats. The morning after Amara's healing, the sky looked the same, yet something in the air trembled as if the wind carried secrets too heavy to keep. Every whisper, every glance, every prayer spoken behind closed doors seemed to twist my name into something both holy and forbidden. I should have known that miracles, once seen, cannot be unseen, and that salvation always comes with a price. By dawn, rumors had already taken shape. They said the river had glowed again, that the healer's daughter had risen from her deathbed untouched by fever. Some said she had been kissed by angels. Others swore the devil had washed her clean. Before the sun reached its height, the villagers filled the narrow road to her father's house, clutching rosaries, talismans, and questions sharpened by fear. Her father stood in the doorway, his hands trembling, his eyes darting to the corners where no one stood. It was divine mercy, he insisted, though his voice quavered like a candle before wind. No mortal hand touched her. But they pressed closer, their doubt thickening in the air like smoke. They asked whose name he had prayed in, which saint had answered. He said none. The silence that followed was worse than accusation. It was the sound of belief unraveling. I watched from the trees beyond the river, the leaves veiling me like witnesses afraid to speak. Amara's window stood open, her face pale in the half-light. She saw me and shook her head ever so slightly, a warning, a plea for patience. But I could feel the shift already, the tide of fear turning back toward me. By evening, my name moved from whisper to echo, carried through the market stalls and down to the wells. The stories grew larger, that I had traded my soul for hers, that the river's glow was not divine, but blasphemy. Some came to pray for my forgiveness, more prayed for my end. That was when the boy found me. He limped from the path, dragging his left leg, his crutch sinking deep into the mud with every step. His face was too young to carry such desperation. "They said you healed her," he whispered. "Please, cry for me." The words tore through me. I wanted to tell him that it wasn't my gift, that mercy cannot be commanded, but his eyes held the same faith that had once saved me from my own doubt. I refused him, shaking my head, backing away as if distance could protect us both. "Go home," I said, but he only smiled, a small resigned curve of the lips, and turned toward the water. The mud gave way beneath his feet, and before I could reach him, the river swallowed him whole. I dove after him, the current burning cold against my skin, the memory of fire surging through my chest. When I pulled him to shore, his body hung limp in my arms. I wept, not for miracle, not for redemption, but for the unbearable silence of a child who had trusted me. My tears fell on his face, each drop glowing faintly before fading into his skin. Before dawn, he walked again. The villagers gathered as he ran through the square, his laughter echoing like a bell. Awe turned quickly to terror. They looked at the boy, then at each other, and the first shout broke the fragile stillness. "He's bewitched us again." Their fear spread like wildfire through dry grass. They had seen too much to call it coincidence, and too little to call it holy. When the bells began to ring without pattern, I knew the sound. It was the same rhythm the flames had once danced to at my door. Night fell heavy and red. Across the water, torches bloomed like angry stars, reflections quivering on the black surface of the river. The shouts reached me before the firelight did, a chorus of anger and prayer twisting together. The wind carried my name again, not as curse, not as blessing, but as verdict. And when the first torch touched the water, I knew this time mercy would not follow. They never wanted truth. They wanted a monster they could see burn. When the torches crossed the river, the fire moved like judgment itself, reflected in every eye that had once turned away from me. The night breathed with chanting, half prayer, half rage, and for the first time I understood that fear doesn't die when proven wrong. It only finds new fuel. I was no longer the boy they feared. I had become the story they needed to tell each other why they were still afraid. They seized me before dawn, rough hands dragging me through mud still warm from the torches. I did not fight. The rope around my wrists felt like something I had been wearing since birth. They brought me to the center of the square, the same place where my father had once knelt in prayer, and tied me to the weather-cracked post as if the wood itself remembered our blood. The crowd gathered in a circle that pulsed with breath and hate, their faces glowing red from the firelight. Amara broke through them, her voice cutting through the noise. "He saved me," she cried, "but mercy has no audience in a crowd that has already chosen its villain." Stones rose like judgment from 100 hands. One struck her temple. She staggered but did not fall. Her blood shone against her skin like a seal of truth they refused to read. "Stop," I shouted, but my words were lost beneath the roar. The priest stepped forward, his robe singed at the hem, the crucifix in his hand glinting like a blade. "If your tears are holy," he said, his voice carrying through the smoke, "then heal yourself." His eyes dared me to prove what he already hoped to destroy. The rope bit into my skin as I lifted my head. I could taste iron in the air. The mingling of fire and blood. I closed my eyes, not to pray, but to remember the sound of water, the quiet voice of the river that had once known mercy. A drop of blood slid from my wrist to the earth, dark as night. For a moment nothing happened. Then a murmur rippled through the crowd. An old man near the front clutched his chest, his knees giving way. His daughter screamed. The priest turned, startled, as the man collapsed at his feet. Instinct overrode fear. I turned my head, and tears slipped free, falling toward him. They struck the dust beside his body and shimmered, spreading like light caught beneath glass. The man's chest rose once, twice, and then he breathed. Silence fell so suddenly it felt like the world had forgotten how to move. The torches flickered uncertainly in the stillness. People stepped back, eyes darting between me and the man now gasping for air, as if trying to decide which of us had defied the laws of life. Amara sank to her knees, her hands pressed together, whispering words even I could not hear. The priest's voice broke the silence, softer now, but edged with something colder. "Witchcraft," he said. "Even the devil mimics miracles." His words slithered through the air, seeding fear where wonder had begun to grow. The crowd wavered, torn between awe and terror. Someone dropped a torch. The flame hissed against the damp earth, smoke curling like a question none dared to answer. One by one the torches fell, their light dimming until only the glow of the dying fire remained. For an instant I thought it was over, that the truth had finally silenced them. Then I met the priest's gaze through the smoke. His eyes burned brighter than the flames themselves, not with faith, but with the hunger of a man who had just found a new way to crucify a miracle. Faith spreads faster than fire, and both burn when left unchecked. In the weeks that followed, the river became a shrine, its banks thick with footprints and candles melted into the mud. They came from every village, every path, carrying the sick, the dying, the hopeless, all whispering the same name, mine. They called me the Tear of God, but I knew the truth. What they worshipped was not mercy, but spectacle. Each dawn began the same. The mist would lift from the water, revealing faces turned upward in prayer. Mothers pressed infants to their chests. Old men bowed low until their foreheads touched the soil. Children clutched my robe as if salvation could be stolen by touch. I wept because I could not bear their pain, and when my tears fell, some were healed. Yet every time the light left my eyes a little dimmer, my hands a little colder. Amara watched in silence, her worry hidden behind a calm she did not feel. At night she would tend to me with trembling hands, pressing wet clothes to my forehead, whispering the same plea over and over. "You're dying," she said. "You can't save them all." But I could not stop. Each life that reached out for me was a memory of every life I had failed to save. My curse had become their faith, and I no longer knew how to separate the two. Word of the miracles traveled beyond the valley. Merchants arrived bearing gifts, cloth, spices, gold, all offered in exchange for blessings. The poor came with flowers, the rich came with promises. And then one night, a nobleman crossed the river. His carriage wheels cut deep into the mud, his soldiers standing behind him like shadows carved from steel. He approached with practiced humility, the kind that hides command. "They say your tears cure what medicine cannot," he said. "My wife is ill. Name your price." "I have no price," I answered. "Mercy isn't traded." He smiled then, a thin knowing curve that made the air colder. "Everything is traded," he said, placing a pouch of gold at my feet. "Even faith." When I did not reach for it, his smile deepened, as if my refusal confirmed something dark he had already decided. He turned away, his cloak sweeping the ground like a shadow of intent. "Keep your tears," he said softly. "You'll sell them soon enough." Amara stood behind me, her face pale in the torchlight. "You shouldn't have angered him," she whispered. I wanted to tell her that truth cannot anger the righteous, but I had seen too much of the world to believe it. The nobleman's promise lingered in the air long after his carriage wheels had vanished into the night. The next day, the river was quieter. The pilgrims still came, but their prayers were edged with fear. Rumors moved faster than the wind, that I had denied a man of power, that the church would come to test me, that the gift I carried would soon belong to someone else. Amara begged me to leave. "You can't fight them," she said, "not the ones who wear crowns." But I stayed. Foolishly, I thought the truth could stand on its own feet. 2 nights later, thunder rolled across the hills, though the sky was clear. From the edge of the forest came the sound of marching, metal striking earth in a rhythm that made the river tremble. The air smelled of oil and fire. By dawn, the soldiers had crossed the water. They bore no banners, no words of peace, only chains and silence. My shelter was torn apart, my name shouted like a curse. And when I called for Amara, the echo answered alone. Her footprints led to the river's edge and stopped. Chains can hold the body, but fear holds the soul. When they dragged me through the city gates, every window shuddered as if the stone itself refused to witness what walked beneath it. The governor's mansion rose from the hill like a monument carved to greed. Walls of polished marble, floors that echoed with power. Inside, the air smelled of wine and iron, and the man who ruled that silence watched me the way a predator studies something it already owns. He called me the sacred healer, with a smile that split his face in practiced benevolence. "You should be honored," he said, voice smooth as oil. "A gift such as yours deserves protection." His words coiled through the hall, each one a promise wrapped around a threat. He stood close enough for me to see that his rings were engraved not with saints, but with his own initials. "Heal me," he said finally, spreading his arms as if offering himself to grace. "Make me eternal, and I will make you immortal." I stared at him, the chains heavy around my wrists, and felt pity rather than fear. "Immortality," I told him, "is the curse I've been trying to escape." For a heartbeat, the room was still. Then he laughed, a sharp, delighted sound that had no trace of humor. "Everyone refuses until they're reminded of what they can lose." He snapped his fingers. Soldiers opened a side door, and the echo of footsteps preceded her arrival. Amara. She stumbled into the light, wrists bound, face bruised, her eyes too tired to cry. My breath caught. She tried to stand tall, but the weight of the guard's hands forced her to her knees. The governor watched me, measuring the tremor in my shoulders. "Cry for her," he said softly, "or I'll teach her what despair truly feels like." The threat hollowed the air between us. My tears fell before I could stop them. They struck her cheek, glowing faintly, weaving light across her skin until the bruises faded and her breath steadied. The governor leaned forward, fascinated, his laughter echoing off the stone walls. "Perfect," he murmured. "You'll never leave this place again." From that day, I became both a prisoner and a miracle. They built a chamber beneath the mansion, a room of marble and mirrors, where nobles came to watch salvation performed like theater. They lined the walls with candles, each flame marking another debt owed to the governor's greed. I healed them one by one, soldiers, courtiers, strangers whose names I never knew. With every tear that fell, the chains grew heavier, and the light inside me dimmed. Amara tended to me in secret, smuggling scraps of food, pressing my hands when the guards weren't looking. She spoke little, her eyes carrying the sorrow of someone counting the days of another's life. "They'll use you until nothing's left," she whispered. "Then they'll build an altar over your grave." I wanted to tell her that her presence was enough to keep me alive, but my voice failed. The room had stolen sound as easily as it had stolen light. Nights became seasons, and still the governor demanded more. His health grew sharper while mine withered, and the mansion's corridors began to hum with the quiet envy of those who witnessed my fading body and the strength of the man who owned me. Then one night, as the guards changed watch, a whisper threaded through the bars of my cell, soft, trembling, alive. "I found a way out," Amara breathed. Her fingers brushed mine through the iron. For the first time in months, the chains felt lighter, as if hope itself had learned to pick locks. Freedom never comes without a debt, and the night we ran, I didn't yet know whose blood would pay it. The moon was sharp as a blade, cutting through clouds that fled before the wind, and every shadow seemed to breathe with us as we moved. Our footsteps made no sound, only the wild rhythm of two hearts beating faster than the earth beneath them. Somewhere behind us, the governor's mansion slept in silence, too heavy, too deep, the kind that always comes before the storm. The guard she bribed walked ahead, torch in hand, his armor whispering against the branches. Amara's hand was in mine, her grip trembling, not from fear, but from exhaustion. I could see the faint lines of hunger on her face, the months of captivity etched into her eyes. "Just a little further," she said, her voice barely more than a breath. "Once we reach the river, we're safe." The air smelled of pine and promise, and for a moment, I dared to believe her. The forest opened before us like a doorway into forgiveness. The path sloped downward, the scent of the river rising, cool, clean, alive. I could already hear it murmuring through the rocks, a sound that felt like home. Then the night changed. It began as a whistle, soft, almost curious. The sound slid past my ear, followed by another, sharper, closer. The guard turned, surprise flashing across his face. For an instant, I thought he'd drawn his sword to defend us, but his smile told the truth before the next arrow did. He had led us into a trap. The first arrow struck Amara's shoulder. She stumbled, but she didn't scream. The second found her chest, the impact driving her backward into me. Her eyes widened, confusion spilling into pain, and her fingers tightened around mine before her strength gave way. I caught her as she fell, the world tilting around us, the forest spinning into streaks of shadow and silver. My knees hit the ground, and all the breath in me broke. "No," I whispered, pressing my hands to her wound. "Not you." My tears came fast, unstoppable, falling over her face, her neck, her trembling lips. But nothing happened. No shimmer, no warmth, no light. Just the dark sound of her shallow breathing and the growing cold beneath my fingers. The guard stepped closer, bow still raised, his smile flickering like torchlight. "The governor sends his blessings," he said, his voice rich with mockery. Behind him more figures emerged, soldiers, faces hidden, eyes hungry for the reward. I pulled Amara closer, shielding her as if my body could undo the wound. "Stay with me," I begged, but the words felt weightless, already drifting away from her. The river was so close I could smell it, the same water that had once carried my curse and my salvation. If I could reach it, if I could just touch it. Another arrow struck the ground beside us, scattering dirt across her hair. I turned toward the sound, my tears blurring the faces that surrounded us. Anger, grief, and helplessness collided inside me until I could no longer tell one from the other. My power had saved hundreds, yet in the one moment I needed it most, it betrayed me. Amara's breath hitched once, twice, then slowed. I pressed my ear to her chest, praying for a heartbeat that never came. My tears still fell, but the earth beneath her stayed dark, silent, unblessed. For the first time since my birth, my gift failed me, and in my arms, her heartbeat faded into the night. When a miracle dies, the world forgets how to breathe. The night I lost Amara, the sky hung motionless above the river, and every star looked like a wound that refused to close. I buried her where the water bends, beneath the willow, whose roots still taste the tears we once shed together. The wind moved through its branches like the sigh of something holy that had given up on prayer. At dawn, the river no longer shimmered. It only carried reflections of things already gone. I sat beside the mound of earth, my hands empty, my chest heavy with a silence so complete it seemed alive. The water that had once obeyed me ignored my presence now. I waited for a tremor of light, for a whisper of forgiveness, but the river kept its gaze fixed forward, unwilling to look back. They came, of course, the pilgrims, the desperate, the dying. Word travels even when hope has stopped listening. They knelt on the bank, clutching rosaries, scraps of cloth, a child's toy, a husband's shoe, begging me to let mercy fall again. I had no mercy left to give. My voice was gone. My tears were dust. When I tried to speak, the wind carried my words away before they reached anyone's ears. In the stillness, I began to envy the dead. Amara's last words circled my mind like moths that refuse to die. "You're not cursed. You're chosen. Chosen for what? To witness the cruelty of my own gift? To prove that even grace can rot if worshipped long enough? The questions hollowed me until I was more echo than man. Night after night I stayed by the river, tracing the soil that covered her. Sometimes I thought I heard her voice inside the current, faint and unsteady, asking me to let go. Other times it was only the reeds whispering. I told myself that as long as I could hear something, she wasn't truly gone. But silence has many disguises, and I was learning all of them. The villagers built a shrine where she lay. They called her Saint Amara, the girl who taught the curses to bless. They lit candles, left offerings, and prayed to the memory of the miracle they could understand, not the one still trapped inside me. I watched from the shadows, too weak to hate them, too numb to forgive. The smoke from their candles rose into the night, blurring the line between heaven and earth until even the stars looked like trembling flames. Days melted into weeks. My body thinned, my gift dried, and the river's song turned to murmurs I could no longer translate. I thought this would be my penance, to fade beside the grave of the only person who had ever called me human. And then, one evening, I heard footsteps, light, hesitant, almost uncertain that the earth would hold them. A woman approached, leading a small boy by the hand. His eyes were pale, clouded with the softness of blindness, his face lifted toward the air as if listening to a sound I could not hear. She told me he had been sightless since birth, that they had traveled for days hoping the healer still lived. I almost told her he had died with the woman beneath the willow. But before I could speak, the boy slipped from her grasp. He crossed the few steps between us unafraid, finding the edge of my robe with small, searching fingers. His voice, when it came, was no louder than the river itself, yet carried the weight of something eternal. "Even if you can't heal," he whispered, "you can still cry." The words pierced the silence I had worshipped for too long. The river stirred, a single ripple gliding toward the shore, and behind my closed eyes I felt the sting of tears returning, not as power, not as curse, but as the first fragile breath of life after God's silence. It began with a single tear, but the world trembled as if creation itself remembered how to breathe. The child's words had cracked open the silence I'd been worshipping, and through that fracture poured every sorrow I had ever buried. For the first time since Amara's death, I wept, not from guilt, not from grief, but from love so vast it frightened even me. My tears fell into the river, and the darkness beneath the surface opened its eyes. At first there was only a shimmer, faint as a heartbeat in deep sleep. Then the water brightened, rippling with threads of silver that wove together until the whole current burned with living light. It spread outward, chasing the night, each wave a promise carried downstream. The blind child gasped, clutching my arm. "It's warm," he whispered, and when I looked down, I saw color blooming in his sightless eyes, reflections of a world reborn. The light climbed the banks, spilling through roots and soil until the earth itself began to glow. Trees lifted their branches toward it, leaves unfolding, though no sun had yet risen. Far beyond the valley, villages woke to dawns that did not fade. The sick sat upright in their beds. The dying drew breath and smiled as if the air had turned to music. Wells that had long tasted of rust ran clear. The people who had once cursed my name now knelt in the brightness, not out of fear, but wonder. I felt it all, their joy, their disbelief, their sudden desperate hope, each emotion pulling a piece of me away. Every drop of light that rose from the water drew something from my flesh, thread by thread, until I was less body than echo. Yet even as I weakened, peace settled over me like gentle rain. This, I realized, was the purpose of the gift, not to hoard it, but to give until nothing remained to give. The boy turned to me, eyes wide and newly alive. "What's happening?" he asked. "The river remembers," I told him, my voice barely a whisper. It forgives. The glow reached the heavens, painting the clouds in colors unseen before, gold melting into violet, crimson into white. Through the haze I saw her, Amara, standing upon the water's edge, her form woven of the same radiance that surrounded me. She smiled, and in that smile I found every answer my prayers had never earned. The current tugged gently at my feet, patient, persuasive, as though it had been waiting all along to bring me home. Around us, laughter rose from the villages, pure, startled, unbroken. Children splashed in the luminous tide. Elders raised their hands in awe. The world that had once hunted me now sang my name, not in worship, but in gratitude. Yet I knew gratitude fades, and stories outlive their tellers only when sealed in sacrifice. The light pressed closer, and the pull grew stronger. My legs gave way. I sank to my knees, the river wrapping me in its warmth. The boy tried to hold me, but my hands had already turned translucent, every vein filled with light. I felt no pain, only release. The sweet exhaustion of a burden finally set down. As the current lifted me, I closed my eyes and let it take what was left. The water glowed brighter, swallowing the sky and shore alike. Somewhere within that brilliance, a familiar voice rose above the hum of creation, soft, certain, eternal. Now they'll see. And with her words, I disappeared into the river of light. They still speak my name, but not the way they once did. What was once a curse whispered behind closed doors has become a prayer murmured over graves. Years have folded into centuries, yet on nights when sorrow sits heavy over the valley, the river still glows with the color of remembered tears. The world has forgotten my face, but the water has not. They built a shrine upon the bank where I vanished, a temple of stone and quiet, naming it the Sanctuary of Tears. Every year pilgrims arrive, carrying jars carved from crystal, filling them with the river's light. They say the water heals wounds that medicine cannot touch, not the wounds of the flesh, but the kind that hide behind the eyes. I have watched them from beneath the surface, their reflections trembling over me like a memory I no longer own. The stories have changed, as stories always do. They say the boy who was born beneath the red moon died redeemed, that the curse turned to blessing, that the healer's tears became the breath of the divine. Some call me saint, others call me spirit, but both are wrong. I was never divine. I was only human enough to break. When the villagers tell my tale to their children, they leave out the fear. They speak only of light, of miracles, of a boy who gave his soul so the dying could live. They forget the fire, the stones, the sound of chains closing around my wrists. They forget Amara's voice, the trembling in her laughter, the night she taught me that love is not salvation, but surrender. History remembers only what comforts it, never what costs it. Still, I do not begrudge them their peace. The river has become what I could not, a promise kept. On nights when grief weighs too heavy, those who mourn come to its banks and kneel. They speak to the water as if it listens, as if it understands, and perhaps it does. The river remembers everything. It is made of memory. Sometimes, when the wind is right and the moon is low, the light brightens without cause. The pilgrims whisper that the spirit has returned, that the healer walks again beneath the surface. They say two shadows appear in the glow, one kneeling, one watching. The first they call the saint, the second the witness. They do not know which one is me. Amara's name has been lost to time, but her voice endures in the ripples that touch every shore. When the world grows cruel, when faith grows silent, the river speaks again in her tone, soft as mercy, unyielding as truth. Those who come in pain say they hear her words drifting from the current. Cry for them. And sometimes, when the sky is bruised with storms, and the first drop of rain falls onto the glowing water, the river answers. It shimmers once more with the same light that consumed me. and in that brief shimmer, I feel the pulse of something endless. Because even now, after all the ages and all the prayers, the river waits. It waits for the next sorrow, the next heart brave enough to break, the next tear willing to fall. And when it does, the world will remember that miracles are never gone. They are only sleeping, waiting for someone to weep them awake. If this story touched something inside you, don't let it fade with the credits. Share it with someone who still believes in miracles. Subscribe so you're here when the next tale rises from the shadows of the river. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done if the curse had chosen you?